It's mid-October in Canada, which means a lot of rain and really cold winds. Not only is this the perfect season for some pumpkin spice latte, it is also a perfect time for my golden soup spicy poached fish with pickled mustard greens. That's a mouthful, but in Chinese it's just 金汤酸菜鱼. Now, I've made a spicy poached fish video before, but if that video was focused on getting the most delicious veggies and fish, this is really about the soup. With pickled mustard greens, you add a ton of that sort of fermented, acidic, and umami taste to the dish, which is very appetizing. Now, to suit this dish to the Canadian autumn, I've used a golden soup base that uses squash produced locally. This adds some sweetness and warmth to the dish that is perfect for the rainy autumn weather. Alright, let me do a quick rundown of the ingredients you'll need so you can go fetch them before coming back to watch the recipe and following along. What I just showed you was some basa fish. This is just a little bit of pureed squash. We also need some nice chilies. We're cooking Sichuanese food. Of course, we need some dried chili peppers. I have 2 different types, but grab whatever is most convenient for you. And then we have some ginger, just 2 big slices is okay. We're also marinating the fish in a little bit of ginger, so we don't need that much in the soup. Here we have some yellow lantern chili jam. It's not sweet, it's just crushed habaneros. Here we have some minced garlic. We will also be needing some freshly chopped cilantro, green onions, and red chili peppers. Now, if you hate cilantro, you don't have to add cilantro. Just some fresh spring onions will do. Here we have the pickled mustard greens sliced up. I'll show you how to prep those in a little bit, but let's start preparing the materials. Okay, let's start with spring onions. What I have is probably not what you're going to find typically for spring onions. We grew these indoors, which is why they look a little bit anemic. They came from my flower pot. But whatever green onions you have, just chop them into small pieces for garnish. And then we're going to go on to our chili peppers. I think these might be Thai chilies. I'm not sure exactly what they are. They also grow in a flower pot somewhere. They're really spicy, which is why I'm crushing them and taking out the seeds, because we really don't need more heat in this dish. A friendly reminder after treating or preparing chilies, don't touch your nose. I found out the hard way while editing this video. Let's not go down that avenue. You just want these in small little pieces and, again, stick them in the same bowl. This is for garnish. And then you'll go on to the garlic. This is going to be one of the ingredients that you're going to pour hot oil over. So we're going to actually chop these sort of roughly. We want them to be small enough so they release flavor, but we don't want to burn them. Crush them and then just give them a rough chop. Turn the slices around and give them another rough chop. After chopping the garlic, put them in a separate bowl because we're going to use this at a different time than our other garnishing ingredients. And then we have cilantro. Roughly chop these things up and you'll be fine. If you really don't like cilantro, I suggest putting in a little bit more spring onions. We're also going to keep this in the garnishing bowl because that's going to go in with the spring onions and chili peppers. Next, we will notice my camera failing to autofocus, but we need 2 slices of ginger, and then we're going to just give them a couple of whacks on each side, not cutting all the way through so that it'll release its flavor a little bit better, so it'll look kind of like that. Now we can do our pickled mustard greens. It'll come in a bag like that or in a jar. Whatever it is, it'll be swimming in its own pickling juices. First thing you want to do is release all of those juices and then give the pickled mustard greens a little bit of a rinse. Just 30 seconds under the tap is enough. You don't want it to be too salty or acidic where it just sort of completely overtakes every other ingredient. But you also don't want to wash it too much because it'll become really weak and tasteless. Okay, this next step If you really don't like eating pickled things, which I can get, or the pickled mustard greens you're getting is not the greatest, you can be lazy and just hack these into roughly, large slices of some sort, and it'll work. This is just a condiment. But since I have some really nice pickled mustard greens that I do intend on eating, we have to find a way to slice it in such a way that it'll still be crispy, but also not be way too thick where it just gets sort of stuck in your teeth and difficult to chew. So we're gonna slice it, at least the stalk part, at an angle. So we can first break all of the fibers by doing this sort of slicing motion, and then we can just hack away and turn it into batons or slices. The thickness of it, you can think of it somewhere between, I guess, like 2-3 millimeters to like half a centimeter. Somewhere in that range will be fine. Next, we're just going to be de-seeding some chilies. Now, we don't want to use crushed chilies because we don't want the soup to turn a reddish color. We want it to stay gold. So we're going to just break our chilies in half. Now, these dry Chinese chilies you'll find everywhere. What's really special is the other kind of chilies that I used. They are called red lantern chilies, not to be confused with like the yellow lantern chilies, which really resembles a habanero. This is something else. It has sort of an appearance sort of like a dried tomato, like cherry tomato, and it's rather sweet and fragrant in taste, but it is not very spicy. Again, for this, we just want to take out all of the seeds. If you didn't know, the seeds of dried chilies can be quite bitter, so that's why we're doing that. And then there's also that big sort of a pit up top, or stub, or whatever it is on the dried chili that we want to take out. Because that green part, once it sees hot oil, is going to be bitter as well. Okay, now this is the interesting part. I think, yeah, this is a buttercup squash. I think this is one of those things where in China we kind of refer to this as a pumpkin as well. So any kind of squash or pumpkin or whatever it is that you use is going to be fine. I tried peeling this with a potato peeler. It's never going to work. So I resorted to the same method that, every Chinese person resorts to while cooking, is that if they can't get through something, they just pull out their cleaver. Jokes aside, this is what your final product is going to look like. We're going to be pureeing this, or in my case, a potato masher, and then through a fine sieve. But whatever it is, just roughly peel it and chop it into small enough pieces and boil it. Okay, while you're boiling it, make sure you add a little bit of acid and oil, otherwise you'll get oxidation and it will discolor. I got out a potato masher. I'm going to run it through a potato masher and then just, make it go through a fine sieve afterwards to take out the fibers. If you have like a juicer or a food processor or one of those big batons with a blade at the end, I don't know what they're called, you can also make the puree that way. But whatever it is, just make a fine puree of pumpkins or squash. At the end of it, you'll probably only need to get out of it like half a cup of pumpkin puree. You won't need all of it. Get out a really nice and sharp knife, which also happens to be the same cleaver I always use, and we are going to just thinly slice our basa fillet. I got 2 fillets, which is about a whole fish. I don't know. I think it's about 2 pounds of fish. It could be a little bit less. We want these slices to be thin enough where it'll be flavorful, but not too thin. And that depends on how thinly you can slice the fish without it falling apart. Just be very careful. White fish is delicate. After you have all of the white fish thinly sliced, grab a piece of green onion. I usually use the leaves that are left over. We are just going to take that, scrunch it up so it releases some of its juices, and toss it in. We're going to just then have a couple of rough chunks of ginger, and we're just going to throw that in with the fish as well. And then we are going to go just a few splashes of rice wine into the fish. This will take out some of the fishiness, but white fish generally isn't that bad. And then a little bit of cornstarch to seal in the moisture. I used about a tablespoon or half a tablespoon. You don't need a lot of it. Get it thoroughly combined. Again, being careful that this is white fish. If you are too rough with it, it will all turn into mush. After thoroughly combining the fish with the dry ingredients and the rice wine, we are then going to go into it with a little bit of peanut oil. The peanut oil will seal up the fish so that it does not dry out and the cornstarch doesn't separate from the fish, but it will also make it so that the fish will not stick together when you throw them into a pot of boiling water, because the cornstarch can act kind of like a binding agent and you can actually come out with a large clump, and that's not good. Okay, we are now going to just quickly oil our pan. I'm using a stainless steel wok, which is why I have to oil it and get it nice and wet. After going cold oil into a hot pan, you'll get much less sticking. Now, just as a side note, please remember to not use a cast iron. We are cooking with a lot of vinegary, acidic sort of things, and that will give you a bad time if you try to cook in something like cast iron. We're going to go in with our lantern paste chili jam first, get that to release flavor, going with the ginger, and then we're going to add a little bit, just 1 spoon or 1 ladle of our pumpkin and or our squash paste. Of course, I'm using squash, I keep forgetting. And then we're going to just add in a little bit of water to protect it from sort of drying out too quickly and completely caramelizing and burning. Okay, now I'm going to add in our pickled mustard greens. A lot of recipes will actually stir-fry the pickled mustard greens first in hot oil. The reason why I don't do that is, like I was saying, I don't want the flavor to be as intense. And by still stir-frying the pickled mustard greens, but with a little bit of that pumpkin and sort of water in it already, you'll still release a lot of flavor and dry it up a little bit, but it's not going to be overly pungent. We want to soften up the flavor of this, and by stir frying it after we add a little bit of water and pumpkin, that's a great way of doing that. After this sort of dries up a little bit, I'm going to go in with another big ladleful of pumpkin. What this will do by layering it is we get different kinds of sweetness. Now, pumpkin or squash, when it's just boiled and smashed, has a very fresh sort of sweet flavor. But as you cook it in higher heat, it'll turn into a more caramelly sweetness. We want both of those things in our soup. Now, some caramel flavor will add extra warmth and take out some of the grassiness of the squash or pumpkin, and a little bit of that sort of boiled squash flavor, believe it or not, is going to add extra umami and really lighten up the dish. We want both. Balance is really the key here, and you can already tell it's producing, as we were adding in boiling water, it's already producing a really nice golden color. We want to just keep adding more squash a bit at a time and adding water. Okay, so after adding in all of the squash and a lot more water and stirring often for around 10 minutes, you can start tasting. The mustard greens, because they're pickled in a really salty brine, it will release a lot of salt already, so you want to taste it before adding in more salt. Okay, not shown on the footage, I added in a little bit more water, a generous sprinkling of white and black pepper, and just a little bit more salt to balance out the flavor after adding in more water. And at this point, you should be ready to put in more fish. Now, before you start putting in your sliced fish, give it one last taste. Make sure that it's slightly saltier than you would like the soup to be, because after adding the fish, it will dilute. At this point, turn off the heat and add in the fish. You want the fish to sort of cook from the residual heat in the pot of water. That way, you'll have nice, juicy, and tender fish that is not going to be overcooked. After all of the fish is in, you want to just give it a couple of stirs and let the residual heat do all of the cooking. 5 or 6 minutes with the heat off should be good enough. But if you are really not using that fresh of a fish, or you're just super worried about getting sick, leave it in for 10. And maybe bring it up to a boil and then turn it off again in the middle of that process if you're super worried. Okay, now take it out into a container. A nice, large, deep bowl, or in my case, a casserole pan, will work perfectly. Something that can take heat because you're going to be pouring hot oil into this dish very soon. Now, get out your bowl of garlic. Put that in first. That is the ingredient that will burn the fastest. And then we're going to go in with our chilies that we de-seeded earlier and just put that on top. And then we're going to go with like half of our garnishings. We don't want to pour hot oil over all of it because it'll wilt and not look as nice, but we also want some of that flavor to be released. This is usually where you'll find Chinese recipes to use fresh, like still green and nice and sort of plump Sichuan peppercorns. I can't find those in Canada, so I used a extra virgin peppercorn oil. If you can't find those, just use dried peppercorns. It's going to be fine, or not at all. You actually don't really need it. It's not meant to be that numbing of a dish anyway. This is always my favorite part of cooking any dish that involves pouring hot oil over aromatics. The smell fills the room and the sound is pleasing to the ear. It's great. How you do this is you just get a pan, get like half a cup of oil, and just heat it until it's basically smoking and pour it over. That's it. And now you are ready to eat. Get a nice bowl of steamed rice, pour the soup over it, and eat it with the fish. You can also use this as a hot pot base, or just have some noodles with it as well. All of these options are equally valid. If you have succeeded, you should achieve perfect balance with the richness of the pumpkin or squash soup base and the tang of the mustard greens to cut through with a ton of heat and incredible aroma from the dish. If you enjoyed it, leave a like and subscribe for more videos.